How are you guys doing? Today is Wednesday, January 6th, 2022. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to do an elite individual profile on George Kittle. On October 9th, 2021, the elite tight end for the San Francisco 49ers turned 28. And because there was a slight mix-up with the original episode that I made, I'm actually going to redo his, and I'm going to give an updated version because he is currently playing with the San Francisco 49ers in the NFC Championship game, as he's on one of four teams that are still actively competing for Super Bowl 56. And if you're not familiar with George Kittle, he is a 6'4", 250-pound tight end who virtually does it all for the San Francisco 49ers. He can pass. He can pass. He can catch the ball. Of course, he can run, and of course, he can block. He is an amazing lineman, and of course, whenever the play is called to him, and whenever it's not even called to him, he will usually do something that will result in the 49ers moving the ball down the field. And of course, for that reason, I think it's worth noting that he is one of the best tight ends in the game. So in this episode, I'm going to break down his impact on the game at a micro level, looking game in and game out, season in, season out, what he's been able to do, and taking a step back and looking at his macro impact and looking at how his individual accolades help shape and define how amazing and unique he is as a tight end that plays the way he plays. So, to give a little bit of background, he's originally from Madison, Wisconsin. He would go on to move to Iowa at a young age, and he would go on to play high school football in Iowa and then in Oklahoma. He will go on to commit to play at the University of Iowa to play with Kirk Ferentz, who has been the coach there since 1999. So George Kittle would work his way onto the team. As a freshman, he was mainly a utility guy, as he would go on to play 3 games for an Iowa team that would finish with an 8-5 record, losing to LSU in the Outback Bowl. He had maybe 100 yards on the season. His second season, he would work his way towards being a tight end. He only played 3 games with only a 25-yard reception a show. And in 2014, this was the season where Iowa would end up going 7-6. They ended up making it all the way to the Tax Slayer Bowl, where they ended up losing to Tennessee by 17 points. However, by George Kittle's junior year, he eventually would earn his way into the starting spot, as he would go on to play 10 games in a season where Iowa would finish with a 12-2 record. They made it all the way to the Rose Bowl, where they would end up losing to Stanford by about 30 points as they finished as a top 10 team in the nation. Kittle finished with 20 receptions for 290 yards as he had 6 touchdowns on the season. And transitioning into his senior season, he would go on to play on the same tight end formation, or he would play in the same offense as Noah Fant, who would eventually be a first-round draft pick for the Denver Broncos. This was when Fant was a freshman. In his senior year, George Kittle would go on to finish with 22 receptions for 314 yards and 4 touchdowns, and this was his age 23 season before he had made it to the NFL. And through his 4 seasons, he would establish himself as a good enough prospect to get drafted. He was taken with the 146th overall pick. He was taken in the 5th round of the 2017 draft. For reference, Myles Garrett was the first pick in this draft. Jamal Adams was taken 6th by the Jets. Christian McCaffrey was taken with the 8th pick out of Stanford by the Carolina Panthers. Patrick Mahomes would round out the top 10 as he was drafted by the Kansas City Chiefs. Looking at his position, the top tight end taken in this draft was O.J. Howard, who was drafted to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Nonetheless, he would get drafted by the 49ers, and ever since, he has been a member of the 49ers. The day he got there, or his age 24 season, he would work his way into eventually becoming a starter. He would start 7 of the 15 games he played in his rookie season, in his age 24 season. And the San Francisco 49ers would end up going 6-10 in Kyle Shanahan's first season. In his rookie season, he would go on to finish with 43 receptions for 515 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was slowly ramping up his production, as it took a bit for him to earn that starting spot especially on a team like the 49ers. And following that first season, he, of course, would return as a full-time starter. In his first season as a full-time starter in his age 25 season in 2018, he would start all 16 of the games he played in a season where the 49ers would go on to finish with a 4-12 record. They won 2 less games than the year prior, as they had the third best record in the division. George Kittle would make the All-Star, or he would be a Pro Bowler for the very first time in his second season on the team. Not to mention he made the second team All-Pro. In the season, he would finish with 88 receptions for 1,377 yards and 5 touchdowns. To this date, that is the most receptions and yards that he's ever put together in a season. And at the conclusion of the season, the 49ers did not necessarily make the playoffs, but George Kittle did make a statement as a player that wasn't really that highly touted in college, that he was a force in the NFL that was to be reckoned with. Following his second year in the NFL, in which he established himself as the second best tight end in football, his third season would be his age 26 season in 2019. In that season, he would start all 14 of the games he played in a season where the 49ers would finish with a 13-3 record, win the NFC West, and they would go on to make the playoffs for the first time while he was there. This was the year where Nick Bosa won the Defensive Rookie of the Year. And in this year, they had won 9 more games than they had won the previous year. In his third season, George Kittle would be named a Pro Bowler, and this time he would be named to the first team All-Pro at the tight end position. He would finish with 85 receptions for 1,053 total yards, as he had 5 touchdowns. The second consecutive year, he would finish with at least 80 receptions and at least 1,000 receiving yards alongside 5 touchdowns. His 5 rushes and 22 rushing yards would be the most he had in a season. And this would be since 2019, he has yet to put up 1,000 yards from scrimmage in a season. Once the 2019 season was over and he was named a Pro Bowler and he was named to the first team, George Kittle and the 49ers would end up beating the Vikings in the divisional round to make it to the NFC Championship. In the NFC Championship, they would end up beating the Green Bay Packers 37-20. And then once they made it to Super Bowl 54, they would end up losing to the Kansas City Chiefs by 11, as George Kittle did have a very impressive showing in the playoffs leading up to then. And however, following the season, which many would attribute to being, if not his best, his second best season to date, George Kittle would return for his 4th season with the team. And in 2020, in his age 27 season, he would start all 8 of the games he played in a season where the San Francisco 49ers would finish with a 6-10 record. They won 7 less games the year after, of course, because George Kittle had missed a big chunk of the season. In this year, he would be placed on injury reserve with a broken bone in his foot in November, missing a big chunk. He came back for the end. However, he was not named a Pro Bowler or All-Pro. Naturally, it makes sense if you miss half the season. And after the 49ers missed the playoffs, this would lead into this current season that he's finished, the 2021 season. The San Francisco 49ers would finish with a 10-7 record in the NFL's first season that was extended to 17 games. They finished with the 3rd best record in the NFC, as George Kittle would be named a Pro Bowler for the 3rd time in a 4-year stretch. He would finish with 71 receptions for 910 yards and a career-high 6 receiving touchdowns, as the 49ers would work their way into the playoffs. Thus far, they went on to beat the Cowboys in Dallas, as the Niners were the only road team in the wild card to win their playoff game. In the second round, they went on to beat the 49ers in the divisional round by a game-winning field goal. And this leads up to where they are right now, as they do have to face off against the Los Angeles Rams. Their matchup will be this Sunday at 6:30 at SoFi Stadium. Right now, they are one of the teams that are very active, and George Kittle is a big part of the reason why. With that said, I want to thank the Pro Football, College Football Reference websites, as well as the NFL and everyone, and even the Wikipedia articles that I use, because I wouldn't be able to do this without them. I, of course, want to thank everyone that's been listening to all 9-10 minutes of this piece. If you ever get a chance, I would recommend watching George Kittle. He currently wears number 85 for the San Francisco 49ers. So with that said, thanks for listening. And once all these exhibitions and matchups are done, I'm going to come back tomorrow on Thursday, January 27th, even though it'll be a while until you hear that episode. Thanks for following along, and thanks for being patient. I am catching up. Thanks for listening. I hope all is well, and I'll catch you with more as time goes on. Peace out.